Let's talk about plants, baby. In particular, those without seeds. Sorry. Okay. Chapter 27. Plants without seeds. So we are talking about the origin of land plants here. And we're going to talk about our more ancient groups, which started out not having seeds. And the big challenge was transitioning from an aquatic life to one on land. So a lot of what we're going to talk about today are adaptations that allowed the ancestors of plants to make their way up onto land. So about 1 billion years ago, give or take, the lineage that gave rise to land plants, which is right here, the lineage giving rise to it acquired a chloroplast via primary endosymbiosis, so giving these organisms photosynthetic capability. Now, there are several groups that have chloroplasts and some of the other features of plants, but are not themselves plants. So what we properly call plants are actually known as the land plants, although some have made their way back to water. We'll talk about those later. But we have several groups that do have chloroplasts, and they're closely related to plants, but they are not in fact plants. So these would include things like the green algae, the red algae, and the glaucophytes. So here are some examples. So have chloroplasts, but not plants. So we have our glaucophytes. So this is a freshwater species with a chloroplast. And this chloroplast is kind of special because it has retained some of the peptidoglycan. And I don't know if you remember this substance, but this substance is found in the cell walls of bacteria. So this sort of more, and if we look at our phylogeny, it's a more ancient relative compared to some of the other groups of protists that are related to plants. So it's kind of held on. It was an early to diverge, and it's held on to some of the features of the engulfed prokaryote. So that's sort of interesting about this group. There are the red algae that have the photosynthetic pigment phycoerythrin that give them that reddish color. It reflects red light, so it gives them the red color. Some also produce or incorporate calcium carbonate into their cell walls, and they are important in building coral reefs. And the green algae use chlorophyll, and I know I've talked about these groups a little bit in the Protist lecture. Use chlorophyll as their primary pigment. That's why they're called the green algae. And they have a broad range of cellular arrangements, including unicellular, colonial, and multicellular. Okay, so here is an example of a red algae, and in particular here is an example of a red algae that's incorporated calcium carbonate. So you can see how it kind of looks like rocky almost, because it kind of is. It's mineralized. Here is that glaucophyte I talked about, and here is a colonial green algae volvox. So all having chloroplasts but not actually plants. And the two organisms that are the two protists that are most closely related to plants are both in, hold on, let me back up for a second. Let's look at our phylogeny. We have our coleochaetophytes, and we have our stoneworts. So these are also sometimes, these stoneworts are also sometimes called the charophytes. So these are most closely related to plants, especially the charophytes. So let's look at them. So here's a charophyte, and you can see it's even got kind of a branched growth, kind of similar to modern land plants. And this little organism called coleochaete is a little disc-shaped organism that lives in ponds. So these are both really close relatives of land plants. So take-home message, the green algae is what we would call the sister group to land plants if we were going to sort of think about the phylogeny of land plants itself. So here we're looking at a phylogeny of just land plants, and we're going to sort of be going through all of these different groups. So I want to talk, actually, let me back up. I actually would prefer to be on this one right now. So I want to talk about some of these synapomorphies among the coleochaetophytes, the charophytes, and the land plants. So land plants and its two closest relatives. I don't know how well this is. Let me see if it'll let me draw something without getting really mad at me. So we're kind of focusing right here. Okay. That looks like a 2-year-old drew it, but okay, that'll work. Okay, so we're going to focus on this group. So okay, and the charophytes, by the way, are aka the stoneworts on this one. Okay, so what are some of the synapomorphies that unite them? They retain eggs in the parental organism. Rather than just releasing them to the environment. They possess plasmodesmata. And these plasmodesmata connect the cytoplasm of adjacent cells, if you remember back to the 1406, talking about cell junctions. Plants have those plasmodesmata that help connect them. They also have a feature called a phragmoplast. So this is used during mitosis and cytokinesis, and it's a complex of microtubules that are formed between daughter nuclei during mitosis, and it's the starting of the cell plate formation. Okay, so if we're looking at a plant cell that's undergoing mitosis and we've got our two nuclei, the phragmoplast is a complex of microtubules that starts to form between the daughter nuclei, and it's one of the starting points of the cell plate that will eventually form and separate those two cells. So they have that in common. And also just molecular data. Molecular data suggests monophyly of this group and suggests that the charophytes, aka the stoneworts, are the most closely related group. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about what makes plants unique now. Okay, so now we're going to focus in on just the land plants. So what's an autapomorphy? A really important autapomorphy of land plants. And we refer to them as land plants, even if they've made their way back to the water, like a water lily, we still call it a land plant. So what separates them from their algal relatives? Well, one really important feature that separates them is the retention of embryos within parental tissue. So the developing embryo stays within the tissue of the parent, and so for this reason, we sometimes refer to land plants as also being the embryophytes, which means embryo plant. So that's like us, right? We retain our embryo within the parental tissue while it develops. So do land plants. Now, among the embryophytes, or the land plants, there are several traits that divide them up into different groups. And we will be talking about these different traits that divide up the land plants, but they include things like the presence of stomata, the appearance of the gametophyte or the sporophyte, the presence or absence of vascular tissue, the presence or absence of seeds, the presence or absence of flowers. So all kinds of stuff that we're going to talk about as either being present or not as we kind of sort through and go over all of these different groups. But the first set of features I want to talk about are the set of features that were important to allowing plants to move to land. Because the relatives of the plants were aquatic. And plants moved to land approximately 500 million years ago. And they were really important. They altered the environment and made terrestrial life possible for fungi and animals that followed. There is approximately 290,000 known species. And again, although some have moved back to water, we refer to them as the land plants because they came up onto land. Now, moving up onto land comes with a price. If you are aquatic, you really don't have to worry about some things such as how to get water. You're floating in water, right? You also have less issues, dealing with nutrients. You're just kind of floating in a nutrient medium, the water. Also, gravity is less of an issue. And so when plants moved onto land, there were some adaptations that they made to try to deal with some of these issues, right? So some of the issues were the need, right? You need to get water. You need to resist gravity. There's going to be predators that you haven't dealt with before. There's going to be all kinds of issues. So what were some of these solutions that plants came up with? So let's talk about these solutions. Oh, I'm ahead of myself. So one of them was the cuticle. So the cuticle is a waxy coating on the epidermis, which is the outer layer of the plant, just like our epidermis is our outer layer, that is watertight. So this helped keep plants from dehydrating too much in their new terrestrial environment. It also gave them some protection from microbes and some, pathogens. They also developed stomata, which are small openings in the leaves that open and close to allow gas exchange. And we also can control water loss through stomata. And when we get to plants that have stomata, we'll talk about their functionality and how that actually works. But gas exchange was also something important, right? They're not just taking in, dissolved oxygen. They've got to, somehow get that gas into them. And then finally, Gametangia. Now, these of course aren't the only adaptations, but these are some important ones. Gametangia are multicellular organisms that enclose and produce a plant's gametes and help keep them from drying out. So multicellular organ on the plant that encloses and so protects and produces, I guess we would say it produces it first, then it encloses it. And this keeps them from drying out. So this is also very important to adjusting to life on land, right? The dehydration issue is huge. You don't want to put all kinds of resources into making eggs just to have them desiccate in the environment. You've got to protect them somehow, and that is what Gametangia can do. All right, a couple of more adaptations for land. Excuse me. The presence of sporangia. So these are multicellular organs that contain spores and these spores have walls made of a complex polymer called sporopollen. Okay, so spores are going to be an important part of the alternation of generation life cycle that all plants have. So we have special structures called sporangia, these multicellular organs that contain spores, and the spores themselves are covered with a coating called sporopollenin, which is one of the toughest substances on the planet. It is incredibly resistant and helps keep spores from drying out. I've already talked about this one a little bit. Land plants are AKA the embryophyte, so the development of embryos, which are the young plant within protective structures of the parent's tissue. Okay, so in this case, when we form a zygote, we don't just release that zygote to the environment. It develops, divides by mitosis, starts to mature, and it does all this within the protective structures of the plants, of the parent plant's tissues. Pigments. So, of course, algal relatives already had pigments for photosynthesis, but land plants developed additional pigments that provided protection against UV radiation. Because they no longer were hiding under the water, so the sort of punishing UV radiation was much more of an issue on land, so they developed some protective pigments to keep them from taking in too much UV. And finally, another really cool adaptation that land plants developed are mutualistic relationships, and a really important one is one with fungi, what we call the mycorrhizal fungi. This was a really important one. So we'll talk about this more when we get to fungi, but there are fungi that will actually form an association with plant roots and allow the plant to increase the surface area over which they can absorb water and nutrients. So that relationship with fungi is actually pretty ancient and has been pretty important for a very long time. All right, we are going to take a little break, and then we'll come back and talk about, in a little more detail, the alternation of generations.